You are listening to Ace Comicals. I'm Greg, and today I'm joined by my co-host Leon. Let's go! Custodiet ipsos custodes. Welcome to another episode of Ace Comicals. This is episode 83, the first in a series that we have decided we're doing, which is why we were silent last week, because we wanted to get this right, and that is watching the Watchmen. And in case you haven't guessed, we're going to be discussing Watchmen. So this first one in the series of 3 casts is going to be purely about the original comic, the 12-issue maxi series that was originally published between 1986 and 1987, largely regarded as Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' greatest work. One of the first actual comics to be collected and released as a graphic novel as well, which we will come to later on in the cast. Today I am joined by Leon.
Hey.
And we have a guest. We have with us streamer and DITB guy, Anthony Askew.
There's another name you've mispronounced, Greg. I'm sorry.
Anthony Askew.
There we go. I wasn't going to call you out, but we were just talking about names that were hard to pronounce or we weren't sure about. So, hello, everyone.
Yeah. I guess we should kick off with introducing, for those of you that may not know Watchmen, what Watchmen is. So, it is the 1986 and 87 12-issue maxi series that deals with the superhero genre in a really unique way. It was like the kind of first book to really open up and deconstruct the superhero genre and play with the idea of the superhero and present superheroes as something deeper.
So I think we're lucky to think that that's the norm for us now. Not to take away from like the old school superhero stuff, but that feels to me so normal. Whereas if you were reading this back in the day, I bet some people were like, "Oh, this isn't what I signed up for," or like had a I would like to think it had mixed reactions that then grew to hopefully a love for the piece.
Yeah, I mean, history is written by the victors, but according to what you read about the reaction to it, it didn't actually. It had like a really, really, really good reception. It was, it's almost as if this is what fans were crying out for, because this is the book that, along with The Dark Knight Returns, kind of helped to usher in what we refer to as the Dark Age or the modern age of comics, where there was like greater political and psychological complexity and. You know, like, they were more violent, they dealt with, you know, like, more sexual themes, things like that, anti-heroes, morally ambiguous in places, and, you know, the rise of the anti-hero and all of that stuff. So,
why did it take so long?
I would say that's partially down to the comics code, because pre-code comics, we're talking about like some of the, you know, like the old horror books and stuff from the 1950s and things like that I mention quite often on this cast. Yeah. So like early examples of horror books and things like that, and pre-code horror stories and things where they were a little bit more salacious, had sexual content, like a bit more gratuitous in the way that they would draw rotting flesh, violence, etc. And then the comics code came in, which kind of meant things had to pull back from that a little bit and couldn't be as on the nose politically and things like that. And also, traditionally, superhero comics were aimed at a younger audience. So things like the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man and all of these superhero comics, the sort of like the re-energizing of superhero comics that happened in the 1960s when you get these characters starting to like pop up, like the X-Men and such, where with Jack Kirby's heyday and whatever, all of that stuff was kind of usually like it was kids that were buying comics, so these were aimed at a younger audience, and so they were kind of a little bit more brighter and happier and tailored that way. And then things started to get a little bit more real in the 70s. Towards the mid and end 70s, you start to get some of it creeping back in again, where they get a little bit more lax with the comics code, and they get a little bit more into issues like drugs and things like that, and start dealing with that type of stuff. And then it's this and The Dark Knight Returns that really kind of like threw the doors open.
What year is Dark Knight Returns again?
Dark Knight Returns is 86.
Wow.
So it's like, and this is like from this. So Dark Knight Returns actually was the summer before Watchmen.
God,
so,
what a decade for change.
I know. Imagine being a comics fan that year.
Oh, I don't even know if I would have known that I wanted that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I feel like
the thing that's nuts as well with that is, I think the previous year overlapping into 86 was Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was DC basically having to pull in all their different universes and Earth 1, 2, 5, 6, blah, 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 and bring it into one core thing.
Yeah.
It had ballooned so big. So it was a fundamental changing point in the sort of the comics world at the time.
Yeah, it's getting silly now, lads. Let's put a stopper in it. That's what that was. That was DC going, lads. It's getting a bit silly now. We need to streamline this. What can we do? I know, big event. And that was when Alan Moore got to do Whatever Happened to the Cape Crusader, wasn't it? Oh no, not what. That's Neil Gaiman. What am I saying? It's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow was the Alan Moore one, which was about Superman. What Happened to the Cape Crusader was the Batman one that Gaiman did. But yeah, so yeah, that's when he did the kind of like the ending for Superman, if you will. Like how to bring all of that Superman stuff to a head, like pre-crisis. They kind of wrote an ending for him, kind of thing, which was to do with that. But yeah, it's so this was Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' sort of like brainchild. Those two having a discussion after a convention where Alan Moore was introduced to Dave Gibbons, and they apparently went to a pub, then sat on a sofa drawing pictures and passing pieces of paper backwards and forth and things like that, and thus Watchmen was born.
God.
Yeah.
What I would have what I would have gave to be in that pub.
To be in that room when, like, in Dave Gibbons' living room while all this was happening.
I mean, at the time, I probably would have thought, who's this hairy dude?
Yeah.
'Cause he's pretty hairy.
He is pretty hairy. Is Alan Moore? Yeah, he's a wizard.
Yeah, he's a
wizard.
And from what I understand, he's a lot friendlier than what people pretend or lead him to act.
People have him pinned as this like this unfriendly curmudgeon, don't they? This like unkempt curmudgeon of comics.
He just like, doesn't like his work being
cast spells on people. But yeah, I mean, yeah, he's just, he just doesn't like people playing fast and loose with his ideas. He wanted agency over his own ideas, and obviously that's where him and comics fell out.
I've seen an interview where he just genuinely believes that the medium of film doesn't work hand in hand with comics.
Yeah. And
or at least adaptations.
Some ways I agree with him. I mean, which we'll come on to in later casts in this series, actually. In this Watchmen series, we're going to be talking about because I think they had a real mayor trying to adapt it, didn't they? Because if I remember something from way back when the Watchmen movie came out in 2010, was it 2010? 2009. When I say way back, like
it is way back though. Like
I know. It's 11 years ago, but yeah, geez, when that came out 11 years ago, apparently, like, when people were talking about it back then, apparently they were having, like, wasn't there a bit of a game to try and adapt it or something, to try and adapt the comic to a movie properly? Or
was Terry Gilliam linked at one point to do like a series?
Well, he wanted to do it as a series, but he had the rights, I think, as early as the 90s.
Oh, right, okay. And then was there a Paul Greengrass link as well?
I'm sure he was attached before Snyder was attached. Yeah.
So does anyone want to have a go at synopsizing the story of Watchmen?
I don't do synopsis. Well, need to know.
This is your job, Ray.
Usually it's Ray. Usually we make Ray do this. But Leon, do you want to have a go? Because I don't know where to start. Because if I do it, it's going to sound really disjointed and like rambly and stuff about giant squids and stuff. So.
Can I just stop? I know that I don't want to hijack the format because I listen to this every 2 weeks and I enjoy the format. But I want to know what each of yours, like, how did you find it? Like, how did you come across the comic? How old were you when you read it? And what were your initial impressions?
Okay, so how did I come across Watchmen? So, I came across this in 2007. That's when the version I've had since 2007. And I think I came across this because I was hanging out with some people at the time who were hype for the movie because they'd read this years prior, and they turned me onto it.
I'm shocked that that's how... And not that I'm like some old school Watchmen dude, but I thought you'd have been earlier than that, Greg.
Well, no, funnily enough, because my comic tastes back then were quite, I don't know, I wasn't as into the kind of like, I used to stick to the more like mainstream stuff. I mean, I guess Watchmen's, you think, I don't know, what's mainstream and what's not mainstream? Yeah, but you know what I mean? I used to stick to things like Batman, Spider-Man, like the more kind of like, I don't know, that was I used to stick to that kind of stuff, so I used to read an awful lot of Batman back then, and I used to read I read like Dark Knight Returns and stuff like that. I used to love all that stuff. But then, like, for some reason, I just hadn't ever really thought about Watchmen, and then I got turned onto it back then. Like, because
it feels like the kind of comic where your uncle says, "Look, stop reading these kids' books. Here's a one for you." And I hand you the book because I feel like I'd never heard of it until. Well, I'll get them when you're finished. Of course,
your uncle hands it to you with all the Ashburns on it and cigarette,
in a real splodge of blood.
Yeah, have a look at this. Some real human bean juice on it. Yeah. So, Leon, where did you find it?
I think in the early aughts, I was on a quest to catch up on graphic novels, and this is in my graphic novels phase when I was one of those douchebags.
Whoa, like, they're a good type of people.
They're douchebags.
Here on Ace Comicals, we try not to differentiate too hard between graphic novel and comic, Askew, because they're essentially the same thing. And graphic novel is kind of like something that someone would say that like thinks they're too old for comics. Maybe I don't know. It's it feels like that, doesn't it? Yeah,
the industry did bank on that. But yeah, back when I was in my graphic novels phase, it was like I don't really want to keep up with the ongoing affairs of like Batman and Spider-Man, and maybe this is coincidental or like related, but in the late 90s I'd been reading the Spider-Man clone saga, so maybe I needed a palate cleanse from that period of time. But I remember I was really in a period of like checking out all the comics you should have read, but in this case it was like the graphic novels, the more adult stuff you should have read. In the same way that in the 90s, there was a big thing with like where we're watching anime, but back then we referred to it as manga because of manga entertainment distributed a lot of the movies at the time. But these were like cartoons, but they were adult with like adult type storylines and like violence and sex and stuff like that. So this was like the comic version of that. But I wanted to like, what are the best? So I'd always heard recommendations, like people would always speak about it in hushed tones, like Watchmen, V for Vendetta. Yeah, well,
in back alleys.
Because I was reading this on the internet at the time. But like, they would talk about those. They would talk about Frank Miller's stuff at the time. As well as like a few things here and there before we got to the 90s and Spawn and all that. But like there were these handful of comics, like Batman Year One is another one, where like people would be talking about all the time. So at the time, I just ordered them all on Amazon, I think, and proceeded to read them one by one. So this would have been maybe 2002, the latest.
Which means that Leon is probably the only one of the three of us that has got the sort of like pre-remaster version, if you like, of the Watchmen comic book. Because there was a point when they went back and they recolored it. When they reprinted it in 2005, John Higgins recolored it. He got a chance to go back and revisit the colours and give them the life that he couldn't give them originally with the constraints of the technology that he was working with at the time when they were colouring things by hand and the printing technology that they had back then versus what can be done digitally now. And we've actually been looking at some colour comparisons before recording. You can actually see the difference in the comic page.
Well, I wasn't as in love with it, not be one of those people, but a kid at school had it. And he had the original colour, 100%, because just of the time. It must have been like 04, 05. And I remember him reading it. He was like, oh, you've got to read it. It's great, it's great. And I was like, I don't like the look of it. It's too dull looking. And in my head, I saw it as like this, like those comics for boys, like these weird, like pulpy, like I don't know, like a group of dudes sent out in a war somewhere. And it's like, these old school, like, men do this, blah, blah, and just not very exciting stuff, not very engaging, but it's like comics for boys were a thing. So I never fell in love with it then, and he borrowed me it, and I was like, actually, and then we are here, where we are. So I thankfully I have read the original coloured version, and I think that's probably why, interestingly enough, because I didn't know there was two coloured versions, perhaps that's why I found the colours quite dull, because it wasn't what they actually wanted from it.
Yeah, it
interesting.
Didn't quite live up to the original vision, and now it does.
So I think there's a difference between the like palette that was used and getting it exactly as Higgins wanted. And I think that the palette was a definite deliberate choice to use those off colors to avoid your like blues and reds, instead go for like purples and golds. But then the process of them being printed ends up where for some people it won't look as vibrant as the recolor does. So
well, I mean,
differentiation between the two.
Yeah, they wanted it. They used a palette of mainly secondary colours to move away from the primary colours that dominate superhero comics or dominated superhero comics back then. So rather than like the blues, reds and yellows or whatever, they moved away from that and they wanted to use secondary colours, and they definitely chose that palette on purpose.
Yeah.
And that was like part of the creative process.
Brighter stuff that it looks, it's like, whoa. And it catches you, not off guard, but it has more of an impact when they do change the palette. Because it happens at times.
Yeah. It's even within... It's within the same palette. It's the same colours. It's just instead of them coming out duller and, instead of them not being able to do certain things that they would have liked to have been able to do, they are not able to do those things because they have the power of, digital colouring to help enhance that rather than the technology that they had by then. There were restrictions and things just did not come out looking like the original watercolours. Because
they should let an AI colour it and see what how that looks.
Jeez. Imagine. Yeah, because John Higgins did the original. He did it in watercolors, and then he would have annotated that with a guide for the print. So, like, to tell them like what quantities of cyan, etc., to use.
God, that's a whole process that I've never considered as a thing. That's really cool.
I mean, the amount of work, it's absolutely painstaking. The amount of work that goes into making a comic, you would never believe. Like,
see, I would love to go back and slap 15-year-old me or whatever, and for somebody who looks at this now and is like, how can anyone not just think this looks incredible?
It does. It looks absolutely incredible. So, Watchmen is a story centered around a group of masked adventurers and one superhero. And it is set in an alternate history in our own world. So it's our world, but certain things happened differently. And those things that happen differently because superheroes were actually a thing. Like, people began to put masks on and fight crime. And it's how the world would react to the actual existence of superheroes. It deals with the lives of these superheroes and the moral ambiguities and their reasons for being superheroes and what drives them, what the base urge is in them that makes them become superheroes and don the tights, and why they do it, and what the public's reaction to that is. And it's more or less just an exploration, and through that lens, it's an exploration and a deconstruction of the superhero genre. And the plot centers around this group of superheroes called the Watchmen, who had disbanded. The government had forced them to disband via something called the Keene Act. Most of them were retired. Some of them were working for the government, and there appears to be a plot, and they are being supposedly taken out one by one, or it begins with the murder of one character. Now, we'll go through introducing the characters as well. So the main sort of cast of this book, we'll start with the comedian, who is the character who only really appears in flashbacks because he dies in the very beginning of the story. Now, the comedian, he is this government operative. He wears the stars and stripes. Not a very nice guy, really, is he? To put it mildly.
I guess not.
And he's like a subversion of the Captain America idea. He's like the idea of the comedian character is to hold a mirror to the actual American dream. So we have this idealized version in comics where we have these patriotic heroes that are this idealized version of the American dream, of the all-American soldier, the American defender, etc., i.e. Captain America and characters such. The comedian is supposedly the reality of that. A true reflection of the American dream. And it's a nightmare. He's also facially based on Groucho Marx,
which that kind of makes sense, but at the same time, I had to when you told me that, I was like, really? Then you see it, and it's kind of like, yeah, I guess so.
And the reason they did that
doesn't stand out
is because they wanted to do the clown thing, but they couldn't because Batman is already doing the clown thing with the Joker, and they're like, okay, so we call him the comedian. Let's what can we do? Oh no, Groucho Marx, I guess.
I'm really like, I know he's not a very nice person, but reading this again now, I've read this multiple times. Not that I feel sorry for him in any way, shape, or form, but I think he's such a fantastic character.
Oh yeah, he's a well-written character. He
is so good.
Yeah, he's just not a very nice character.
Yeah, I think just the fact that he's like, his story is, I guess, told from other people's experiences of him.
Yeah.
So you always have their opinion. Yes, I mean, their opinions are right in like most cases, but I don't know. I think he's just such an interesting anti-hero.
But it's because he's quite a tragic character, and obviously we'll get into more detail with that. But there's, as you say, because his story is told from different characters, and he is presented in a way where he's kind of a pragmatist, a realist. It's like, the world sucks, everyone gets dirty, and I'm getting dirty doing my thing. He's to a degree, it feels like he's cracked the code of the worst parts of humanity, and it's a place where he thrives because he doesn't really have time for the niceties or the nonsense. He's a person who gets the job done and lets all of the sort of horrible nihilism just wash over him.
And he gets away with it as well, with him being like this government hand, that he kind of gets to do what he wants. And it kind of, perhaps, like a blind eye looked upon it most of the time. Which I love the fact that the opening scene with him dying, you see, I guess, this character who you're not meant to like, you see him with this really strong vulnerability from the offset.
Yeah.
So you see this old man getting beaten up and killed.
But then when they're examining his body, you do have a
big sense of sympathy for him.
Until you learn about him.
Yeah, I mean,
there's
no way to kind of gloss over it, but
no, but yeah, I mean, what else was going to happen to someone that lived like that? You know. Well,
this is what I think is one of the early genius points with the comic, where we're set up and we're seeing someone be brutally murdered, and we get it in flashbacks as the cops are referring to it, and as Rorschach himself is in the apartment, so we don't actually see it play out like that. Instead, we get it mirrored from panels, and we sort of see what happened. And from our point of view, all we know is a few things here and there at the time, that it's this person who's in a picture with Nixon or something. It's like, whoa, he's in a picture with the president. Who is this guy? Because to the cops, he's just some weird old guy. And then the doors only opened immediately, literally, when Rorschach opens up his head in his closet and finds all of his gear. And it's like, for us as the reader for the first time, it's like, oh, this old guy who was taken out, he was a superhero. And then that's where it begins to complicate everything from that point on.
Yeah. And it seems like he's using his real name by then as well. They refer to him less as the comedian and more as Edward Blake.
Well, I don't think that obviously most of the masked heroes aren't ever named. I think there's only Hollis Mason. Do they know John's name? I mean, the government obviously knows.
Yeah.
John announces his name after his dad dies.
Yeah.
Oh yes, that's a key part. Yeah, yes. Yeah, that's a key moment.
That's
a sad moment because his dad never knew what happened to him. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's sad. There's so many sad things that never rung with me as a kid so much. Not that I was this heartless teenager, but when you have time to properly take it all in, and wow.
That's the point I wanted to make. It's it was like reading a completely different book when I read it again now compared to when I read it last about 10, 11 years ago.
The understanding of the world changes, and unfortunately the same wrongs that these people are committing then are still very much
a thing
now.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Yeah. So I was going to come on to the next one, which is Dan Dreiberg, the Night Owl. Now he's kind of like the, if you like, the Batman analog, kind of like, the gadgets and the rich bored guy who becomes a superhero because what else is there to do with my money, which I think is something he even says in the book, isn't it? And he is the Night Owl. He wears the costume. He's a little more theatrical than the rest of them, I think.
Because he actually grew up as a comics fan, and he was particularly a fan of the original Night Owl, Hollis Mason, so he is Night Owl too.
Yeah, so he's like your Batman or your Blue Beetle, which I'll come on to in a moment. You've also got Dr. Manhattan, who is probably like the kind of linchpin here, because he's the only one with actual superpowers. Now, he is kind of like the Superman analog, sort of based on Captain Atom. And a lot of the book kind of revolves around how it would deal with someone with actual powers. Because, I mean, he's not just got powers, he's basically a god. And he's really detached from humanity now because he doesn't feel human anymore. Which is a lot of what the story deals with as well. Like him, you know, why should I care about humans when I'm no longer human? I have transcended humanity. I am something else. We have the Silk Specter, who is the only female character in the group. And she followed in her mother's footsteps, and for her, this is kind of like, it was like a publicity thing, it was like a modelling career, but she was also a crime fighter. And she, I think she ends up, her story kind of revolves around her, like, being pushed to fulfill her mother's dreams, I guess, isn't it? And also, like, dealing with...
Yeah, because she's kind of like a sort of child actor type thing. Or like a kid who got big off, like, pageantry, where there's one parent just pushing them to live their dreams through their kid. She's sort of an analogue of that. Yeah,
exactly. And you've got Ozymandias, the world's smartest man. He is, I guess as the book goes, you could almost say he's more like a supervillain than a hero. But he is, he's based on a character called Thunderbolt, who was another Charlton Comics character, which we'll come on to in a moment. But he, his whole thing is that he's super intelligent, he's super smart, he's a very accomplished businessman. He has this need to prove himself to the world, to prove that he can do things and to prove that he can achieve things. Like, he has this, like, he's like the classic overachiever. He wants to achieve things. He wants to prove, it's like he's constantly got something to prove to the world, I think, is the whole crux with him.
To follow his hero's footsteps, isn't it?
Alexander the Great. Yeah.
I would say he's kind of got superpowers as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a stretch compared to Manhattan and other superheroes, but his abilities are beyond human.
Yeah, he's incredibly well trained, has an incredibly sharp mind, almost beyond human, but the whole point of him is that I have achieved this and I am human. And he has achieved this through strict training and everything else. You know, he's done this by being him. And that brings us on to the final character, possibly the most interesting character of the group, which is Rorschach. Now, Rorschach, he even looks like the Question. He's based on an old Charlton Comics character called the Question, who is also now he's like sort of like a mainstay in the DCU now. Actually, a lot of these Charlton characters actually were co-opted into the DC universe. So when Charlton basically DC kind of like took these characters from Charlton and gave them a place in the DCU, and DC will publish stories which include these characters. You may have heard of the Question and the Blue Beetle, etc. Now, Rorschach is he's how do you describe what Rorschach is? He's just crazy, isn't he? He's paranoid. He's it's like he put the mask on one day and never took it off, I guess, is the easiest way to explain it. He lost something of himself when he decided to become a superhero. And again, he's not a very nice person. But
he used to be all right.
Yeah, he used to be all right, but then he just kind of slowly got worse and fell into a downward spiral, and he is like the ultimate nihilist, I guess.
Yeah, it's also, he is someone who has quite moral absolutes. There's no shades of grey whatsoever. There's
it's
only
all black and white,
and that he has an unflinching sort of objectivist, near-fascist take on that, where if someone's not good, then they're automatically bad.
Yeah, and
if you get caught speeding down the street, he'll come and break your wrist.
Yeah,
regardless of you could be rushing your pregnant wife to the hospital. Or
exactly.
Something.
Yeah. But he's not
rules.
Yeah, exactly. Which is again like an absolute extreme version of the question.
Which is Mr. A, isn't it? Which is Ditko's other creation.
Yeah, they're like basically Ditko. His whole he was a massive objectivist. He was like he basically must have read some Ayn Rand at one point, and then like that was his philosophy was objectivism. So he kind of began to pour that into his characters, and that's where we get the question from. And Mr. A, as you just rightly said there, yeah. So this is what Rorschach is. In fact, the character design is basically the question, but filthy.
Though someone who Rorschach is my question, if that makes sense. Like he's the question. Like, I don't have any other character that he's based upon. He is the original.
Oh yeah. No, there are characters
with
in
his
their
mask.
own right.
Does the question's mask change?
No, the question doesn't have a face. So he has the question.
Has he not got the question? Has he got a face? Anything?
No, it's literally just a blank mask.
So, right, okay. I mean, I do like that design a lot. I do like that design a lot.
Yeah.
But it's a genius stroke to have Rorschach's mask change in every frame.
Oh, yeah, I like that, yeah.
It's like, what can we do to do this? And the logic behind it, how it's explained, how it works, is perfection as well.
Yeah, I love that.
I don't remember that as a kid. Whereas this time around, I was like, oh, that's actually really well considered.
It's probably my favourite issue, actually, the Rorschach one, where he's talking to the psychiatrist.
Oh, I don't think I could pick a favourite.
That's got to be my favourite issue.
Oh.
But yeah, I mean, largely because I think out of all the characters, I find Rorschach the most interesting.
I mean, as a kid or when I was younger, I was fascinated because I love like film noir stuff and like the idea of this detective. And when you kind of reveal his face and you understand what it's like, it's just adds so many more layers. And I think as a kid, I was kind of disappointed he wasn't this suave, cool, like cliche. And obviously now I'm very happy with whatever he is.
For me, like obviously the noir detective thing, like when I was younger reading this, it was like, this cool noir detective. But now when I read it, I actually start to see how much he goes around in ever decreasing circles with his ramblings and things like that. So when you read his dialogue, when you read his descriptions and his, his little, his narrations, like his Rorschach journal entries, like he's constantly like going over his own footsteps again. He's just like spinning and he's not actually solving anything or getting any closer to the truth. He's just...
Oh, I think he is. I think if anything, he is the linchpin of the mystery. Without him, I feel...
Oh, without him alerting the others.
He's the one who's like, there's a conspiracy. Yeah. Without him, I think they wouldn't have got anywhere.
Yeah, and he's the only one...
Manhattan knew from the beginning.
Yeah.
Time for him is ever present, or however you want to describe it. So
yeah, because Dr. Manhattan exists across all time and space. He is like, I don't know how to describe his powers other than he's a god.
They do a really good job of showing how his inner mind works. Like 'cause they could describe it till they're blue in the face. Not want to make a pun, but they managed to do it in a way that still seems like I can't comprehend it, but still kind of grasp it to a degree. Especially in the last chapter, where they show like him speaking, but it's him answering someone else's question later on down the line.
Exactly.
So clever.
In its beginnings, the original idea for this book, for this group of superheroes, was that they were going to use the Charlton characters that DC had recently acquired by that point. But the DC bigwigs had other ideas. they didn't want the Charlton characters to be used and not have any. Basically, at the end of this project, there wouldn't have been anywhere they could have taken these characters. It would have been a closed door, and I don't think they wanted that. They saw other potential with those characters, and they didn't want them to be sort of like boxed in with such a
killed
definite.
Off.
And that's the thing.
Killed off. Yeah,
they'd bought them not that long before they started to happen.
Yeah,
so it would have been kind of brutal to spend the money acquiring the license.
And then Alan Moore's like, "I want to kill him," and then DC's like, "No, Alan." No.
The thing is, I mean, I totally get the logic behind that, but surely now that is way more common. Where in an arc or a telling of a character's story, then feel free to kill them off. And they'll just be in a different.
But I guess you got to remember as well is that Crisis on Infinite Earths is planned to come out before this.
Yeah,
and that was their whole thing of fixing everything. And they killed some characters off. They brought some back from the dead.
Right, I see.
I don't think they wanted. They basically literally just bought. They're brand new. They didn't want the toys broken straight away. You know. So they sort of encouraged them to come up with original characters, which is what they did, which ended up as analogues of these Charlton characters anyway. Or even flat out mirror image subversions of, because the comedian would have been the Peacemaker, and the Peacemaker, famously as a character, was a pacifist. And he only used non-lethal ways of subduing criminals.
Well, Ozymandias is a pacifist, isn't he? I'm sure they reference that, he's not going to hurt us, he's a pacifist, and all this stuff towards the end.
Yeah. But yeah,
I wonder how it would have sailed if they did use these non-original characters in this story. I wonder how different.
There is a glimpse or a glimmer of that. You do get a peek behind that curtain if you go and read Pax Americana, which is part of the DC Multiversity book.
Okay.
The DC Multiversity arc, as it were, event thing, because I've got it collected in a single. I've got the DC Multiversity collection. If you read the Pax Americana issue, which is basically Watchmen, but they use these actual thingy characters instead.
I'd be interested to see
a Watchmen style story. Yeah, using these the Charlton characters, and it is a masterpiece as a single issue comic. It is an absolute masterpiece. I think we've mentioned it a few times on this cast, haven't we?
Yeah,
I'm sure it comes up.
Yeah, we have, but we've not properly dived in, so we can do that on one of the future episodes.
Yeah, that's coming on one of the future Watchmen episodes. But yeah, so you'll get to look at that, which is interesting. That I quite like that they did that. Actually, that's quite.
Well, I'm pleased they use original characters, because I find, somebody who doesn't read comics as much as you guys, the idea of reading a story about an established character is slightly off-putting. And can borderline be intimidating, and you think, oh, maybe I'll not bother. So the fact that, yes, they are kind of established characters in their inspiration, as a reader, you don't have to have that weight.
But,
mind you, this is so well written, it wouldn't matter who the characters were, to be honest.
Exactly. What this book did, what it opened up for the industry, though, was it kind of ushered in this this age of these stories where you didn't need prior knowledge of characters. For example, you could enjoy Dark Knight Returns without having a lot of prior Batman knowledge. And
weirdly, I feel like everyone's got some Batman knowledge.
This
very rich.
I think the reason this could be collected into a single volume like this originally, I think the whole thing when they collected it into a single volume, was A, because of the critical acclaim, and B, because you didn't need any prior knowledge. You didn't have to go hunting for back issues to find out who the comedian was. It was, it's all there, and it's laid out start to finish in 12 issues. That's it, beginning, middle, end.
I think relying on kind of existing, not to say it's lazy, but it shows a story doesn't require, which we all know, we don't need to be spoon-fed information, whereas just as an initial impression, it is nice to have something, but obviously once you get into it, there's nothing quite like this. There is now, but
it was the first the first ever. I mean, I don't think they ever intended it to be collected like this when they were writing it. When they originally conceived it, I don't think it was intended for it to be collected into a novel. For it to, I don't think that was the intent. But obviously, because it had a start, middle, and end, it lent itself to the format, and that kind of ushered in this graphic novel culture that now pervades throughout comics, and or more specifically trade paperbacks, where arcs are collected and you can read a single arc. You can just dip in and dip out in places by just picking up a single arc of a character and enjoying it. Things are collected into neat little arcs, and you can enjoy a story involving a single character and a single villain, and you owe it all to Watchmen in a way. But yeah, before that, there was never really this practice of collecting comics together. This and Dark Knight Returns were like the first two kind of thing. So it's a trailblazer in that way. So yeah, this book, as we've already said, it completely deconstructs the idea of the comic book hero, and it peels back the layers to the wooden frame of the superhero comic. And then it places that frame in the real world, and this is what we get. We get the Watchmen story, which is, it's a book about a hero trying to save the world at the root of it, but it's the way he saves the world, I think, which is very real. It's like something that it's very real in its its consequences, I guess. In the way,
is there anything else that had done this, or that kind of the bad guy's actually the good guy saving it for like a greater good? Was there anything else that had done that? I guess I want to call it a twist before, because it feels like nothing else can do it again without being just compared to this.
I wouldn't, off the top of my head, I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Because it still blows my mind. Honestly, I think it's such a fantastic resolution. So bittersweet, but logical.
I know there are other like examples of this type of story out there. I just don't know, where to start. I can't. You know what I mean? It's not there right now. The knowledge isn't there. Yeah. I've been living inside, like we were saying before the cast, I've been living inside Watchmen for 2 weeks. In the lead up to this, I feel like I probably smell like Rorschach, and upon finishing this book, I knew what it was that cats screamed about in the middle of the night. Like so.
It took me a lot longer to read this time round than I expected.
Yeah,
before I started reading it again, I Googled, which is a silly thing to do, how long to read Watchmen. And it reckons, I think it was 7.5 hours. BS. I honestly think one chapter and it's like pages after, 1.5 hours, 2 hours easy. Seriously,
I don't
know. Long time in this.
I think the actual chapter itself, like ordinarily, I can get through a single issue of a comic in about 15 minutes.
That's quick.
With the Watchmen back matter, like these extra, half a novel at the back of each issue, because they do a lot of world building in this actually, which, so the whole point of this is it builds this alternate America on the brink of nuclear war, where President Nixon is still in charge and shouldn't be by this point, and things like that. And it's just it builds that through the kind of notes and the kind of extra matter it gives you in the back of the book, like excerpts from
like Hollis Mason's autobiography,
autobiographies,
the comedian's character.
Yeah,
there's like articles, like Rorschach's
articles,
notes from his therapist, and all this stuff.
Yeah, so all that kind of stuff, like extra little bits in the backs of each of these issues, which kind of just builds the world. And there's like one of the most interesting ones that they do actually is they give you like an alternate comics history for pirate comics, because this was actually something that was, when the book was conceived, it was a throwaway idea as something to be different in this world from our world. So in this world, for example, because superheroes were real, people didn't want to read about superheroes in comics anymore. So the superhero comic went out of fashion and people started writing pirate stories instead. And pirate comics became a huge thing in this. So this whole thing about pirate comics, and they come up with this whole alternative comics history almost through the history of pirate comics. And that's like detailed in an article in the back of one of the comics, which I thought was really interesting, because they actually like they use EC Comics, which is an actual comics publisher, which is now owned by, I think Dark Horse own the rights to a lot of EC stuff and publish a lot of EC stuff, or EC lease their stuff to be published through Dark Horse, because Dark Horse publish a lot of the old they publish collections of a lot of the old horror comics that EC used to publish. And I thought that was pretty interesting, and I quite like the idea of pirate comics. And I went looking for, I was like, I wonder how many actual pirate comics there are. And funny enough, there's not any like real, like, you know, like pirate stories comics or whatever.
Not like One Piece. You're talking like Buccaneers and proper.
I'd be talking, because One Piece is a pirate comic, but I'm talking like,
it's being silly.
Yeah, Western. I was thinking Western pirate comics, like pirate comics in the tradition of, like comics about pure pirates, like about like a comic about the life of Blackbeard or whatever, you know, Edward Teach or that kind of stuff. But there's not a lot of it out there, or even pirate comics that are like anthology style comics, like horror comics used to be. So pirate comic magazines type thing. But yeah, it's weird because in fact there's absolutely nothing actually that I could really find. I mean, I'll probably get corrected. If anybody knows about any pirate comics, then please send them to me, like link them to me or whatever, and I'll check them out. But as far as I could find, scouring the internet, I couldn't find anything. So that's still an original idea for that book, and something fairly original, like the idea that obviously because superheroes were real, that people were putting on real masks and donning masks and fighting crime, that superhero comics would fall out of favour, that people would enjoy pirate comics instead. That was something that really worked for me, actually, that was.
It's weird though, because I mean the comic, the Black Freighter one that they use, is so dark and bleak, and in my own head I would expect in a world of this where everything is just awful, like dark, everyone lives in poverty. It's very dark. It seems like the kind of world where they'd want like these nice, not unicorns, but like nice happy comics to take them out of this like the drab of their lives. But yet obviously Bernie, the guy reading it, the young kid reading it, he's enamored with this negative story when in reality all this way worse stuff is just literally to his left and to his right. And
the device of using the narration in the story and using the pirate story to frame what's happening in real life, like they do throughout the book, is really good.
I think some of those chapters are what really take me a while to read, because you automatically read the bubble and then you're like, oh shit, this isn't a bubble for what's going on with Night Owl. This is something else. But obviously it's juxtaposition. So is it not
juxtaposed?
Juxtaposed. That's the one. With obviously the imagery of what's going on so well.
Yeah.
It's like they have this perfect comic and they're like, you know what would make this better? Let's chuck in this like side story that is just in line with everything. And of course it's even bigger because obviously the author of that is very much part of the story in the finale. I remember as a kid being like, why is this in here? I actually, the end of the chapter, like pages where you read the like Mason's autobiography, I skipped them as a kid.
Really?
Yeah. Even now when I read comics, you know, I always listen to you guys saying like, "Oh, there's some great interviews with the writer at the end, letters from the fans." I never read those things. Seriously, it's never something I'm interested in. But obviously, this is so important to the story.
I wrote a letter to a comic once.
Oh gosh!
But you never read it, did you? No. Did you ever read Murder Falcon?
No.
Oh.
I don't think it's my cup of tea.
Oh, you'd love it. No, but yeah. So yeah, it's just going back to like the character designs again. I've so there's this other book that is like a companion book to Watchmen that I've got, which is it's called Watching the Watchmen, and it's sort of like Dave Gibbons kind of like breaking down the creative process for the Watchmen book, and it kind of explains like where certain ideas came from and gives you a look at some concept drawings and some of like the original art and things and like character designs and stuff like that. And I was flicking through it the other night, and there's some absolutely bizarre character designs for Rorschach, isn't there? Because I remember showing you guys, like, Rorschach didn't start life looking exactly like the Question. He started life in a
streaker.
Yeah, well, no, like, not the streaker, the full body Rorschach suit. He had like this full body suit made out of like the same material that his mask was made out of, like this full body Rorschach block. So yeah, naked Rorschach. Like he wasn't like, because there is Flasher Rorschach, but we'll come on to that. But like these are like different action figures, you know, like those old Batman toys you used to be able to get, like the Batman animated series toys where they all had like different like things like spring action wings and stuff like that.
What's a spring action Flasher toy?
I'll talk about that in a minute, because I had the idea in my head like for hours. But anyway, like this naked Rorschach is basically just Rorschach in an all over bodysuit, kind of like the Riddler in I guess, is it the 70s Riddler, and also you could say for a more recent example of this, Jim Carrey's Riddler, where he's wearing like the skin tight green bodysuit with all the question marks all over it. But imagine that, but like white with a mask, like a morph suit. He's wearing like a Rorschach morph suit.
He's like the Pepsi Man.
The Rorschach. So that was one of the designs. And then like the most bizarre design they ever did, in like, they said that they knew this was never going to work when they did it. And I don't know why they did. So he's wearing the all over Rorschach morph suit, but then
I can't even remember which one you're talking about.
He's got a Mac, like a rain Mac, and a hat, like a proper, like when people when people describe a Flasher to you, someone in like a big coat, like but naked under the coat, and then just like opens the coat kind of thing. Like and like, but Rorschach, but a design of Rorschach that was like a Flasher. So he had the hat on and the coat, and he had he's got these like bizarre like knee-high tweed things on, like that hide the fact that he's not wearing trousers.
Maybe this is what Moore and Gibbons were like 7 pints deep in that pub. It's Watchmen started with that design.
Flasher Rorschach. Well, apparently he goes around just opening his coat. But like he's got like the coat on. When he opens the coat, he's got the like the Rorschach block morph suit on underneath. And I'm just imagining an action figure that's got like a spring-loaded coat. So the arms like are there, and then you just press the button on his back and it just goes chunk and just like flips open kind of thing.
You know, I quite fancied buying that art book, but I don't think I want it anymore. I think some things are best left unknown.
But yeah, Flasher Rorschach, yeah. So, like, Rorschach went through some bizarre designs before they finally decided, why don't we just, like, make him the Question, but with a blot face instead? Which works really well. Because obviously, like, we were saying this, weren't we, when we were discussing, because I sent you guys these pictures when I was flicking through the book earlier this week, and you raised an interesting point, Askew, because you said, wouldn't that design of Rorschach, the one that you called Laughing Cowman, where it was like the all over, wouldn't that drastically alter the character? As in, like, the way that the story played out, as in the way the character behaved, and I feel like it would have.
Yeah. I mean, for a start, the top knot, seeing that go down the street wouldn't be intimidating at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's masked Crusaders less so than, like, I guess Night Owl's wears a suit, but no, I like the idea of a mask. You know, you wear a mask to change who you are rather than a... Then again, his outfit, Rorschach's outfit is very much part of his mask as well, which, you know, he has to go back to his apartment to get his full outfit, not just one of the masks. But a question, though.
Yeah.
So I don't want to dive off too much, but why... Because his mask comes from the fact that there was a dress made with material that Manhattan had created and all this kind of stuff. Why isn't there, like, people walking down the street in, like, Rorschach dresses?
Because that was a one of a kind, and the model that was supposed to wear it decided not to, so it never got seen by the public.
Okay. Question answered. Question answered.
I think that's the way it's described in the book, and I think that's the idea that because the model never wore it, she never, like, the public would never have seen it, I guess, so they wouldn't have wanted it. I don't know.
Never caught on.
Yeah, it never caught on as a fashion statement.
And of course, there's a sad story as to why she didn't, isn't there?
Yeah.
She gets murdered or something like that, and then...
Yeah. But did she get murdered?
Of course, everything to do with Rorschach. I'm sure she gets... Or she goes missing or something like that, and I think...
Yeah. Or she decides she doesn't like it. Because they make it, they show it her, and she's like, I don't like it.
I'm sure something happens to her, because I'm sure I think
she dies shortly after that. She gets murdered shortly after that or something.
Weird guilt that he feels, and then it draws him to taking this fabric home, and then he takes it
home and he practices on it, and he learns how to cut it up without... But in the beginning, he's not doing it to make a mask or for any reason. He's doing it just because. And he's almost doing it so that he can, like, change it so it doesn't look like a woman anymore. Because
I'd have to reread that bit because it's very key in the comic. Whereas, not to mention the film, but mention the film, it's just a mask in the film.
Yeah, but in the comic, there's like this whole I mean, that's probably the best issue of the comic, and a lot of that gets skirted over in the film.
That's for the next. Honestly, I could. Yeah, it's different. That's a different episode.
But yeah, so that's part of Rorschach's. Part of the tragedy of Rorschach, I suppose.
He's got like almost like another character in himself as well, which is him without his mask, which obviously we've touched upon. But his entire backstory is obviously extremely tragic.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see, like, obviously it's a big thing where they have this confidence that they don't have normally as themselves just by putting on a mask.
Which is Night Owl.
Yeah. Which
And,
he is, I remember thinking he was so lame. Like, and to be honest, I still think he's pretty lame.
He is. He's a bit of a wet blanket.
He really is. Now, I was never fond of his design.
Yeah.
I don't know why, whereas now rereading it again, some of the scenes with him and like when he's going to sleep with Laurie and he can't get it up or they're not seeing eye to eye. And it's just him stood there with his belly out, basically. I know he's not wearing the Night Owl suit, but looking at the suit. I think that's one of my favourites because I think that goes over 2 pages and it's just no dialogue or anything. I just think it's such a moment for his character.
My favourite bit with them two, which actually made me laugh, it's like a thing. I don't know if it's supposed to be a gag or not, but it's like a running theme throughout the book: nostalgia for men. The aftershave, and it pops up in all sorts of different places. And there's this bit at the end where they're both crying, and as they're crying, they're getting undressed, and they're in Ozymandias's Antarctic base, and like you can just imagine them like saying it between weeping. Like, Silk Spectre asks him Laurie asks him what he smells of, and he says nostalgia.
See, I think that's one of my least favourite moments not because of that, whatever that's meant to be, but I feel like that bit feels very clunky. I'm not wanting to rip this apart.
Yeah.
But they've just found out 3 million people have died in New York and potentially more, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, this is kind of Laurie's character. I think this is important to her character. She's kind of thinking about that, but at the same time, what about John? What about what's going to happen with me? Essentially, she's quite self-centered.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're all faulted human in many, many ways, but I don't remember that being as stilted when I first read it, whether it's intentional. It's probably intentional.
Oh,
but
yeah.
This time around, I was like, oh, don't do this, don't, And I'm surprised that they sleep together at that point.
I mean, for that, I just feel like that, because I was like, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? And then he says nostalgia, and I'm like, oh, it's a perfume gag.
I don't even know whether it is a gag. I honestly don't know. Like,
that felt to me like a gag. Like, when he turns around and says nostalgia, just that line, like, I smell like nostalgia, that's like it felt to me like a joke. I don't know why.
See, is it not him basically saying, like, because obviously they've not done the job for it, they've not done this adventure and stuff for a while, they do it with the prison, they break Rorschach out, and is it not just him basically saying, we're back, or like, accepting what's happened is kind of rekindled their own or his confidence in it. I honestly, I don't know about that scene.
But then there's the bit where Rorschach is arrested, and they're like, "What's that smell? Is that cologne?" And then it turns out he had a broken bottle of nostalgia in his pocket.
I didn't. Maybe it needs another ring. I didn't.
So I think it's
not saying you're wrong, but
and then Laurie throws the bottle of nostalgia at the wall. On John's glass palace on Mars, yeah. So I think this nostalgia perfume thing, and it's Adrian's perfume line, isn't it?
Yeah, which that's only just kind of making sense now.
What I'm not understanding from you guys. So what's the question here in terms of the nostalgia thing? Like what it means, or what?
No, well, I guess so, but like because. Greg, I would say I don't particularly like that scene. I don't like the way the characters react suddenly to...
But I'm saying it made me laugh when he turns around and says, I smell like nostalgia. And I feel like it's like a gag that's running throughout the comic with this nostalgia perfume. I don't know.
I always assumed all of that was like... as you get throughout the whole book, you have like plays on words and plays on themes, and the fact that the perfume's named nostalgia, but all the different elements in which it's deployed throughout the book. I thought that all of that was like the intent, where it's like it works on multiple levels because it works on a thematic level in quite a on the nose way. Then it also works on a layered way in the in sort of the world of the actual comic.
Yeah, because I mean, like I can see it that way as well. That it works as like nostalgia, because these guys are nostalgic from when they used to be adventurers way back. And
but also often, like what Askew said, they start at the end of the book. They start talking about going back to being costume adventures. So it works on that level as well, where it's like we're back in the saddle, but also I'm like a middle-aged dude. Like it,
yeah. So the whole point of this is like the whole point of this story is we had superheroes emerge in the 40s. Like it kind of follows like actual comic history, doesn't it, when you think about it, in the way that they introduce superheroes in this timeline, in this story, in this timeline of well, it's supposed to be our world, isn't it? It's like an alternate timeline.
Oh, so you mean as we got the comics, so if you look at with the time of them going out and doing it.
Yeah, so like the first Minutemen and whatever in the 40s, the first group of superheroes, the Minutemen, which is where the comedian and Laurie's mother, the first Silk Spectre, were operational. Like you get, and the first Night Owl as well. You get like it's like Golden Age comics, and the way that they're introduced in the 40s is kind of like the same way that superheroes began to appear in the 40s, and then there was a resurgence in the 60s, wasn't there, with the Crime Busters?
Yeah.
Yep, and then after that they were back again in the 70s up until the Keene Act, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like following actual comic book history up to the point that Moore and Gibbons were conceiving all of this.
Oh, it definitely was. I've got no doubt whatsoever that is the prime intent of the timeline. Even
down to the way the lettering's done in the stories, because if you look at it, like, you know, when they're doing like the Golden Age stuff, we'll call it the Golden Age stuff, which is when the original Minutemen were around, you've got these curved edge balloons, lettering very reminiscent of the lettering in early comics. When you look at early superhero comics and stuff, that was the style. And then as comics evolved, the style changed, and then in the 60s we've got like a different style of lettering, and into the Silver Age, and then into what was then the Bronze Age and the Modern Age. We've got these kind of like jagged edged speech bubbles that are a little bit more a little bit harsher, a little bit more you know, a little bit realer, I guess. And just side note, I can't talk about the lettering in this without mentioning that Dave Gibbons' lettering was the inspiration for the greatest ever crime against humanity, that is Comic Sans.
Oh, there you go.
I don't have as much hate towards Comic Sans as everyone else.
I've got a question with the Keene Act, not in relation to the comic, but what was going on in our world with comics in the 70s? Were people getting bored of superhero comics, and it's kind of like a hark to that? Did they outlawed them, or because I don't know obviously I wasn't alive for a start, but I don't have that same history that you guys might have.
It's more things were moving towards. So the comic code was there, but like they were kind of like openly flaunting the comics code. Like,
so do you think they're implying that with the comics code was also the outlaw of good comics?
No. I don't think that. I think the Keene Act is just a story device in Watchmen, right, which is what forced them all to retire. I don't think that's got anything to do with actual comics history, because in actual comics, if you look at the 70s, that's when throughout the 70s is when Kirby wrote the Fourth World stuff, isn't it? That was like early 70s. And throughout the 70s, you've got like a lot of Spider-Man a lot of Marvel comics published in the 70s, a lot of DC comics in the 70s. It was kind of like almost the beginnings of the heyday, what we call the Bronze Age of comics, where things were getting a little bit more real again. And you'd had comics dealing with like subject matter like drugs, and you've got these famous issues of the Black Panther where he fights the KKK. That kind of stuff, where it gets a little bit more socially aware. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's more symbolic of that. Like the old style of hero isn't going to cut it because you're all banned.
Yeah, it's like things.
A little bit.
Heroes losing their innocence, I guess, is the way you could frame it. Because the Golden Age of comics, I mean, obviously we get to see behind the camera, and it's not so innocent in the way Watchmen put it. But the Golden Age of comics, we had this innocence, we had this like these very very black and white, good and bad stories, these very like this dichotomy of good and evil, and you know, like good is whiter than white bread good, and bad is badder than bad. And there was no sort of moral ambiguity there. And then in the 60s, we had these heroes, but these heroes with more real problems. Like Spider-Man, for example, he was a real teenager. He had real problems that real teenagers had back then, you know? Girl Trouble, etc. And then you had heroes like the X-Men, which again, you know, like real teenagers dealing with real problems, dealing with prejudice, being mutants and everything else, and they're starting to deal with that sort of stuff. And then in the 70s, they kind of started to deal with those things more, and where the Comics Code prohibited certain things being in comics, I think Stan Lee was like, well, we kind of have to do it anyway because this is a good story kind of thing. With some of the stuff, I mean, obviously I'm going to have to do we'll probably have to do a show on this at some point, but it's kind of like where things started to lose their innocence a little bit. And then obviously this comic, Watchmen, is like the kind of like calling time on it and ushering in the dark age of comics, if you will, when things really did begin to be more geared towards adult audiences.
Well, I guess comic book fans of the youth were
growing up
themselves at that point.
Yeah,
so.
which is why there was a market for it, exactly.
Yeah.
And obviously there still is a market for it because nowadays people like us, we grow up immersed in comics and comics characters in Marvel and DC, and we later graduate to books like Watchmen.
So I wonder what our Watchmen's going to be, what our kind of generational defining comic. Because I still think it's going to be Watchmen.
I don't know, you know,
because it's too present.
I think there's a lot of movement now with the comics industry becoming more diverse. Comics representing more of the fan base and being more representational in representing different races, different people with different sexualities, stuff like that, and being more representational and being more diverse and being more inclusive. And I think out of that, maybe we'll see like another renaissance.
Well, I mean, even
this I don't know.
Is kind of scratching that itch. Like there's so many, unfortunately, like NPCs. I don't want to say NPCs, but like the non-leads.
Mm.
You know, it feels diverse. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's some good representation of like the gay characters, the trans person. Joe, is it Joe? They get called.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Joey.
At the time when I was reading this, obviously I was a kid, not like ignorant to it, but it's going back to it. It's like, wow, this is
for its time. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's
and you'll notice now in comics, there's like things are a lot more representational. Like in Marvel comics and things like that, things are moving to be more representational.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing, because comics are for everyone, and everybody should be able to find something that they can anchor themselves to and recognise themselves in and enjoy.
Do you think that's because there's so many of these like indie comics and stuff, it's just opening so many more doors for people's voices rather than having to rely on like a big company to give it a green light?
Maybe, but the big companies are green lighting this stuff as well.
What, only now, or do you think it's a reason? Because surely this comic should have paved the way. I mean, it's all great in hindsight, but
this paved the way for things like a lot of the stuff you got from Vertigo. So I would say this paved the way for the kind of things you were getting, like Sandman, for example. Neil Gaiman's Sandman.
Yeah. That
kind of story. So, but I mean, like, and then they paved the way for things like for that kind of representation and this kind of like in mainstream comics, I suppose.
Yeah.
So mainstream comics were still would still have been very geared up towards the traditional audience of, you know, young white men, which is what a lot of these stories were geared to. A lot of these characters were young white men stories for young white men, I guess is what comics would have been way back when. But like now, with the way, I guess Watchmen paved the way for things that were getting published by Vertigo, and then everything on Vertigo, that kind of stuff, those kind of stories that were a little bit more edgier, a little bit more dealing a bit more like off the mainstream kind of stories would have paved the way for representation and diversity in mainstream comics. Which is
it's crazy that like dealing with that kind of stuff is regarded or was regarded as being edgy. That's it's crazy.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if that was the right word to use, really. But
no, I'm not saying that. I'm not picking at you here, but the fact that it's a novelty to have that. I mean, it's great that it's more present, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no comics historian, so I mean,
yes, you are, Greg.
Everything I've said could have just been complete bullshit just then. But that's the way I see it, I guess. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, because like I would say with this, starting at the beginning of the point, with it mirroring the various ages. So obviously, when we get the Minutemen, we're in the golden age of comics, and it's all sort of like adventurers and stuff, and the sole female character is like a pin-up, like literal pin-up style.
Yeah.
And then we get to the Silver Age of comics when we get the Crime Busters, and that era is like dealing with a bit more like a bit more grit, but not really grit, like you're saying, dealing with like social and civil issues at the time. But in this way, it's still framed, because they're still tools of the government. It's still framed as the right versus the wrong type thing. So you have this set of characters in the 60s, and all that's happened now is that the sole female character is wearing a sexy outfit instead of a pin-up, like a more modern 60s sexy outfit. And on their like map of things to do, they've got, it's all very standard, like obviously Nixon's president. It's very standard clean up the streets type of thing. And one of the things is like on the board that the comedian burns up, one is like black unrest. So it's I think it sort of follows it as it's going through its eras, it's sort of following the fears and the zeitgeist of the eras. Because even you could say Dr. Manhattan is like a Silver Age character, where he's more based on like, he's like sci-fi. What happened to him was an accident and he got powers type thing, like with Spider-Man and various other heroes of the time. And then
his emergence, yeah,
and then by the time you get to like the 70s, like when the Keene Act is being passed, that's around the time of like we're going to get in the Bronze Age, which starts to go on to like deeper and dark themes. But at that point, it's done. It's stopped. Heroes are no longer allowed to work unless they're one of the few who are working for the president, and who is Nixon, and like furthering his agenda. So I think you've got that, because you've got that mirror. What you get after then, in terms of what you're saying in terms of diversity, I think Watchmen's only thing with diversity is like having a couple of like side characters, and just them being there, but still of the main heroes who are part of this journey, you've got the one character, and then a rest of
five white guys.
Yeah, the rest are white dudes. And all the other stuff, like you said, edgy is a good word used in the context of what you're saying, because it's like that would have been what it would have been deemed in the 80s and the 90s. Like, oh, it's edgy. Like, this book's adult because it's got non-straight people in there. It's got a jive talking black kid for some reason. But it's got like a mix of all that stuff. But how you connect that with today is that today you've got actual creators from those marginalized backgrounds who are creating the things, and I think that's what a key difference is, and why I wouldn't put too much credence in Watchmen having a hand in that particular. Because
this is what I'm getting at, because people from those marginalized populations, like Leon says, would have been reading this, and then would have, and now they're working for DC and Marvel, and they're creating the heroes that represent them for DC and Marvel that represent other people like them.
Yeah, and then in the way that Watchmen feeds into that is that Watchmen gave us the general population like a diversity of type of story you can tell in a particular genre, and I think that's where its legacy in those terms of things is more than having like some token background characters.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's a shame that all those kind of background characters are always there as they've always got a sad story to them, but rather than kind of being like a triumphant character, it's always like, oh, the lesbian character from whenever with Sally Jupiter, oh yeah, she gets killed. I feel like they're all used as a device to, I guess, bring sympathy round rather than it was doing good things themselves. It
was like the age that they were in back then, in the golden age, that kind of stuff would have been. It was a scandal, wasn't it? And people's attitudes towards that kind of stuff were very, very different. Which,
but one thing where I would push back on that a bit, actually, with what you said, Askew, is that what all of their storylines feed into, and one of the things I really like about the book or the story is that we get snippets of these characters, and I do like the way how towards the end they all converge just before Squid Time. It is cool because what that is doing is it's giving us New York, and by New York is giving us humanity, because there are only viewpoint into the world of normal people, because we spend most of the time with people who are crime fighters or like superheroes, but those are the people who are actually normal
on the streets,
humans. So like with them being selected to be like not just more other like standard people, but them being of like more diverse than normal sexualities or like ethnicity, it does sort of feed into the thing of like the world is a bit more this, and these are the are stand-ins for the rest of society. So in that way, it's subversive in a positive way in that sense.
I never even considered that, and that's really good.
So, Watchmen does have a very, very rich legacy, I think, in comics, and it really did pave the way, like we've been saying, for this entire cast. I just wanted to mention like a few of like I guess favorite moments in the book, because my favorite issue is the issue that deals with Rorschach's past. I just wanted to bring up an observation of mine, actually, that he looks like when he takes his mask off. Do you not think he looks like the kid from the Mad magazine covers?
Yeah. Why is that one your favorite?
Why is that? I don't know. I think because for me, Rorschach is the most interesting character. I think it's because he feels like a Batman villain. In that he has like a kind of like a he's actually mentally ill. And he, and the way he expresses that and deals with that, and his past and everything else, and everything that came together to make him like it wasn't like something. He wasn't a government agent. He wasn't rich and had all the gadgets. He became this because because of all the trauma that led up to it and everything else. And I think it's because
it's the proto Joker.
Yeah,
in terms of the we live in a society style Joker.
Yeah, no, because he's more like, I guess if we're going to go down that line, that's what the comedian is.
Well, see, I don't think I agree. I think there's nothing in the well, obviously we don't know his full past, but I do like Rorschach, don't get me wrong, but I like the fact that the comedian is bad because he's bad. I don't... How am I wording this? Rorschach's got good excuse, I suppose you could say the word excuse, for how he acts and how he is, whereas I almost think that seems kind of cliche, whereas all the other characters, I feel like, I don't want to say more fleshed out, but they feel more like people. No, I'm not saying that the normal person doesn't go through like child abuse, all that kind of stuff, by no means, but I'm using the comedian as an example. His actions are that just of a bad person with no justification from his childhood or anything like that we know about. So I think that's why, at least on this run, I think Rorschach might have been, this is going to sound insane, possibly one of the least interesting characters. Yes, he's got the groundwork and that building them up, but I almost feel I'm almost bored of that.
I think it was the air of...
Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it was the air of mystery surrounding him up until that point.
Oh, don't get me wrong. You don't have to justify. Honestly, I love that.
Yeah.
But reading it this time round as an adult, I think there's more interesting stuff that is a lot more subdued and kind of discreet.
And that's the thing. I think one of the reasons you feel that way is that I think a lot of creators have taken the Rorschach
as a crutch.
Well, not a crutch. They've taken the Rorschach template and put it on like nearly every villain or every anti-hero. So you're at this point you've been over, I guess,
desensitized to that as a
with that archetype thing.
Yeah.
It's like that. In some ways, that's like literally the storyline of the recent Joker movie.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It's seeded everywhere, and I think in some ways you've got people who are given the right lessons from that, and in other ways we've got the anti-hero dilemma where a lot of people took the wrong lessons from that.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I could read this in maybe a year's time when I'm, in a different mindset, different films out, all that kind of stuff, and be like, Rorschach is the best character. He is the most interesting character, but I just think there's not disagreeing with what you're saying. I think there's a lot.
Yeah. And I don't want to dismiss it as live in a society Joker, because I don't feel that's what it is. But yeah, I don't know. I thought
my point with that was more leaning into what I was just saying with Askew, where it's become that brand of anti-hero.
Yeah, I like the character design of Rorschach as well. I think.
Oh, I think that design is fantastic. Which on the other side of this coin, I hate the original comedian design with the mask.
Oh,
I think it's really ugly. I don't really know what it's going for. Like, 'cause I know he's meant to be a comedian, and it's kind of like clown-like, and it's got like the colors around the eyes and stuff. But maybe it's like a forced smile because it's like got his teeth on show and stuff. It's maybe like forcing a smile. I don't know, but I don't like that design too much.
I think it's. I don't know.
Do you think with Rorschach there is a potential flaw in that character in the way that they've been picked up over the years?
Yes.
What do you mean?
Rorschach was clearly written, and even more said this a million times, and it's on the page as to be a sociopath. Like, this is what an actual detective superhero would be like. This is what happens when you have someone with such extreme right-wing views who, for him, attempted rape is just a momentary lapse, but like any minor crime is a more absolute, you should be punished for it. This is a guy, obviously, who has been interpreted to be cool, where like loads of people, if you talk to a random person who knows about Watchmen and has seen the movie and ask them who their favourite character is, they'll say Watchmen, and they won't say it's their favourite character because it's the most interesting character and it's called the character work, is because it was a person who was anti-government, who was he's the one who told the truth. He's the one why anyone will know what will happen.
He didn't back down in the face of the conspiracy, and he walked out of the base, and
And he's basically like QAnon.
Mm.
The character, like he's walking that. He believes in all these
conspiracy theories
and stuff, and but he's presented to be like a cool question type person who wears a cool hat and he goes around hurting villains and stuff, and he's the one who knows the real deal, to the level where even like Ted Cruz said he was one of his top 5 superheroes, and it's like, that's hilarious because it says more about Ted Cruz than he wanted it to say. But like, that's the thing. Like, I think a lot of people, in the same way that people connect with people like Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver, where Travis Bickle is a horrible person. He's a great character study, and he's amazing to watch in the movie, but he's a horrible people. But a lot of people, for them, it's just, are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Like, that's all it is. And like the Mohawk and all that, like, I think that sometimes the aesthetic, if the aesthetic betrays the intent, then the intent will be taken wrong. I don't think the aesthetic betrays the intent in the book, but I can see how after this book happened, like Frank Miller books got really, really big, and then we got to the extreme 90s. I can see how that would just keep building to the fact that you've got people who stan Rorschach and anti-heroes of that type without digging into them at all.
I'm guilty of, not to that extreme, but I'm guilty of thinking Rorschach's really cool. And I don't think I'm going to like stand here and be like, yeah, you're right, maybe I shouldn't like him. But I think I like him with more of a nuance than just, he sticks it to the man, da-da-da-da-da-da. But I can't put it into words. So maybe I am guilty as being.
I'm like you, Askew. I'm guilty of falling into that trap because I did fall into that trap when I was a teenager, when I was younger. I was like, okay, like Rorschach.
The Walter White thing. It's like Tony Soprano. It's all these things because they're the main character and because they stick it to the man and look cool or say things that are cool, have loads of quotable lines and stuff.
Yeah,
I think what happens is because I'm not one of those people who says that you can't, like, just in case like listeners think this, I'm not saying that you can't like villains. I love villains. Villains are great, but I do think
you have to know they're villains and not idolize them.
Yeah, like I think you can appreciate that Rorschach looks cool, his mask is awesome, and all that stuff. And a lot of his lines, like, out of context, do sound badass when you read them. But I think there's extra work to do there that a lot of people don't do, and that's realize that the book's holding us at the end is near sign in our face, saying this guy is not a good person that you want to emulate.
He reads the New Frontiersman, and then there's an article from the New Frontiersman that basically excuses the behaviour of the Klan. Yeah. So it's like all these things, like when you actually he's not. I mean. He's just not a nice guy, is he, at all?
See, I don't. I get what you're saying, Elliot. I don't stand him in that sense. I think I'm with you. I think you can like a character, but people go above and beyond to.
That's how I feel. Like I feel about him the same way that I enjoy a good Batman villain. Because
but they almost feel a lot more tongue in cheek than Rorschach does.
I don't know. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, but I enjoy him in the same way I enjoy those characters. In that there's usually some kind of I don't know, but yeah, I mean that was why I found Rorschach the most interesting. I like his story and I like his issue. The character that I actually feel really sorry for is John.
I don't think there's a character I don't feel sorry for.
I don't feel sorry for Dan because I think Dan has quite a comfortable life and he's like...
See, I think he's been living this comfort in hope. It's almost like he's living this life where this comfort is just a comfort blanket that's just waiting to be torn off his body and let him do what he wants to do, which is what Laurie... It's not Laurie as a person. It's like it's just him meeting her in the circumstance lets him revisit his past with the whole nostalgia thing. But
He's literally having a midlife crisis.
Yeah.
Except for like a Porsche or Ferrari, he's got the owl jet thing.
Archie.
Archie.
But it's like...
It was called Archie.
Yeah. Archimedes. But he's, it's like he's got like the whole like, he's like old before he's old type thing going on.
It's because when he was a young kid, he hang out with an old dude.
Yeah. Him and Hollis are like...
Yeah.
See, I feel I don't think as a character, if anybody, I think I feel sorry least for John. If there's anybody who doesn't need the sympathy of termites like us, it's Dr. Manhattan.
But I'll tell you why I feel sorry for Dr. Manhattan, right? Mm-hmm. He was, you know, it was an accident, and he managed to sort of like through sheer will bring himself back, and he's dealing with the fact that he's now a god and he's losing his humanity and he no longer feels human. He no longer refers to himself as John. He's like, John, he even says it didn't kill John and it won't kill me. That's like later on in the book. So he doesn't see himself as the same person anymore.
But for that reason, I don't have any sympathy towards him.
But he has
he's above that understanding of personality and human nature. He is way beyond the sense of that.
But because he's still human in a sense, in his mind. I think even when he was human, he never had any agency. People were making decisions for him. If you look at his interactions with other characters, like when he describes how he met his first wife when he was handed the beer and everything else, it's almost like he just fell into everything. Like he just fell into it. Like he had these decisions made for him by other people and he just went along with it and just fell into it. And because he has absolutely no agency, and now that's led him to becoming a super weapon rather than, you know.
But yeah, like as you say, that's a great point, because John doesn't like, because I'm sure there's a line about his dad not pushing him, but like suggesting he go the career he goes in, and then everything is sort of like laid out for him, and to the level where it's even destiny, really, that like, because as it's presented, it's like in my future, the watch is waiting in the chamber for me to go to it. And I think what makes John sad in the end is that, he's an omnipotent being, whatever, but he has less free will than we do, because
it's already predetermined.
Going off what the text says, and then applying that to like humanity as large. So assume there isn't like it's all predestined, and we don't have free will as it's presented in the book. Just take that as a given.
Yeah.
So we humans, we can't see like the forest for the trees. So while that is the case, we don't know it. So we still have the illusion that our actions have consequences. Whereas he doesn't get to live that lie because he experiences it all at the same time. So he's kind of trapped. Like, why would a guy enter relationships that he knew were going to break up? Because he was there when they broke up. Like, he can't. He still so in a sense, he has to sort of go through the motions, and that's what he's like trapped.
But with his understanding of time, surely he knows that by erring from that path, he could change it.
But just like
I don't think he can change it, because he's living it at the same time.
And like 10 years down the line to him is 3 seconds ago. It's now. It's not now.
But he wasn't.
He doesn't have a future or a past. He's experiencing all at the same time.
But it's like his
he kind of there is something I always like pick up on. His actions do dictate an outcome, but obviously they're already predetermined, because he tells Laurie that she's going to walk away crying or whatever else when they're on Mars. And because of his actions having an impact, if he'd never have said that, would she have done it? And which, I mean, as a whole, it depends how you kind of think about time theory and all that kind of stuff. But
Or using the time theory that this book is using.
The rules, yeah.
It always happened. It's like the thing of someone pushed me out of traffic when I was 10 or whatever, and then later on, when you're 20, you go back in time and push yourself out of the way of traffic.
Yeah.
If we dig into it, and with quantum mechanics and all that stuff, your head will explode. But going off what the book sets up of this particular popular theory of time travel, or like time as a construct, then everything that happened did happen and will always happen.
Always happen, yeah.
Or everything that's going to happen has already happened. Yeah. So, I guess, I mean, because he experiences all time at once, that's why he feels he has no agency, but that's why I feel sorry for him.
Also, I would say that, as we see with him, he tries to have relationships with people, but like there's no second god for him to have a relationship with, so he has relationships with human women. Yeah. Sometimes they're a bit too young for him, but like he has relationships with human women, and they
just a little bit too young for him, Leon.
Yeah, no, very much so. I'm putting that on the record, very much so. But and it doesn't work out for him because he experiences time in the way that he is, and because of him no longer being one of the ants. He's always going to be terrible at relationships with someone who is subject to all of those laws. So even with the epiphany that he has later in the book, where human life is worth saving because of thermodynamic miracles, because of the randomness, how these set of actions led to these set of actions, led to these set of actions, led to this, and this time here, and you fell in love with me, X, Y, Z, blah, 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 blah. Even having that, his thing is to say, I'm going to create life of my own, because at that point he knows there's not another Dr. Manhattan for him. So in that way, he's sort of lonely because he's the only one. He's not the last one of his kind. He's the only one of his kind. So he now has to take a different role, and that is as the god. The creator. Which, like, that's how good that's how good the writing and art is in this book, that it makes you have sympathy and feel sad for a god.
Well, he's a very sad god. But yeah,
I want to go on. Sorry, Greg.
I was going to say he makes some questionable choices, but
the thing is, he is a douchebag as well when you think about it.
Oh
yeah. Because he dates a 16-year-old girl, which is bad enough. But, like, he doesn't stop the comedian killing his baby mother with child. He helps Nixon win the Vietnam War. So he basically is an American imperialist agent at that point. So he's not good at all.
Yeah.
And from that point on, he's just selfish. He's just like, he creates cool things, so technology moves quicker, but he could literally end world hunger and stuff like that.
But he decides not to.
Yeah, he doesn't do it. And then when things get a bit hot, he's just like, well, I'm going there.
Yeah.
He just
decides not to meddle.
Though when he does leave for Mars, he possibly has the most human moment, at least for his character in the entire book, where he's getting interviewed by the news, and obviously they've got all these blah 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 got cancer and he worked alongside it. That response, it's kind of surprising that he acts like that.
Well, this is something I've been thinking about, because he experiences it all at the same time. So part of me thinks that, why does he ever laugh, or why is he ever surprised by things? And you could say, like, oh, that's a inconsistency of, like, the science and the character. Or
actually, Laurie brings that up. Because she says he still behaved surprised when he found out about me and you, even though he knew he was going to find out about me and you to Dan.
And that's the thing. I think it's because so this is like, so you know when we talk about bulk beings, and they're like fifth dimensional beings. So, and we obviously run on 3 dimensions. We wouldn't know what a 4th dimension was at all. But if you assume, say, the 4th dimension is like time, then you're still like, what the hell is a 5th dimension? So, like, if there was a 5th dimensional object in front of you, what would it look like? Would it be continuously morphing in front of you because it couldn't hold a shape in 3D space? Like, what the hell would it look like? And I think that's kind of what it is for us. So our interpretation of it is, he is going through the motions. So why would he like laugh or whatever? But I think for him, because he's experiencing all those things at the same time, it's only when he has to refer to something that actually becomes a thing. But I think he still is. I think he's still present in the moment. It's just for him, the present moment is the whole time.
Yeah.
It's so good.
It is.
Which is why that issue, issue number 4, is my favourite issue.
Yeah.
Because
I
think it's just really effective in marrying a few things together, particularly us getting to see the world through John's eyes, but also the fact that reading a comic is exactly the same as how John interprets time. If I pick up my copy of Watchmen and flick through it, I can go to like one of the last issues and read that page, and I can flick through and go back to one of the first pages in one of the first issues. And like when you open a page, the whole panel, you see it at the same time, and then you fixate on one. And I think that like issue 4 is basically comics, the issue, and relating it to this character. I think it's just a lot of like really smart ideas, like converging in one.
When you put it that way, time for John is comics. Because he sees it all at once. He's like reading the beginning of the run and the end of the run all at the same time.
He doesn't need a pull list.
He is the pull list. No, yeah. But yeah, so yeah, in a way, that is a really interesting issue. And when you put it that way, Leon, because I never actually thought about it like that. That is like a really interesting storytelling device. And like quite meta actually when you think about it, that because the way he sees time is the way we view comics. So in a way,
it's on a level that we can't even understand or compare it to.
The closest thing that we can compare it, the closest thing we can use to compare it is a comics page, because we can see the past and the future at the same time. And the only way
that involves us turning, he doesn't even require a turn.
Well, you don't. If you look at a page and you just scan a whole comics page, you can see something that's happening in the past and something that's happening in the future, and everything in between.
I guess so, yeah.
When you look at imagine just 4 panels in front of you of a guy walking down the street. Like, one panel he's outside house number 1, end panel he's outside house number 10, and you can see both of those at once.
I guess so.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, and they like Moore and Gibbons flex with that, and then the very next issue they flex again with a fearful symmetry.
Yeah,
and that is a flex. I mean, now it would be looked on as a gimmick if someone did that now, but the fact that the whole book just mirrors itself, it's like a palindrome, and then you get to the middle and you have the splash page. It's like, that's next level. That is amazing, and it always blows my mind when I go back to it.
And palindromes, Ice Cream Man. They did that, but in a more overt way. But yeah, it's a beautiful issue. Fearful Symmetry is spot on, and like the just the way that they use other little things within Fearful Symmetry as well. Like, there's a lot of symmetry inside the symmetry. So although the whole comic is like, palindromic in its layout, there's actually, if you look at in some of the panels in the comics, there's certain things that appear that are like based around being symmetrical and things like that. Some of it by accident, actually, because Dave Gibbons goes on record by saying that he was told by Alan Moore, because that book, Fearful Symmetry, begins with a hippie killing his family, doesn't it? Because he thinks he's saving them from World War III or whatever, so he murders his wife and kids. And Alan Moore said that he wanted there to be some kind of like 60s paraphernalia in the scene, like when you see the room with the posters and stuff. And there's an album cover that appears in it, which is a Grateful Dead album, and it is I can never say this word because it's like it's a palindrome. The word itself, the title of the this is all pure by accident. Like, he just happened across this in a book of album covers when he went through looking for album covers, and he just happened across it, and it just happened to be perfect for the thing. The title of the album is a palindrome because it's AOXOMOXOA, which I think is supposed to be pronounced Oxomasoa. It's a meaningless palindrome, and you would pronounce it Oxomasoa. But like, even the artwork as well. Like, if you look at the album art, it's like symmetry, the skull and crossbones with the two eggs, and like it's cut completely down the middle and then drawn symmetrical on both sides, like a Rorschach blot. But yeah, it's down to that level where, I mean, this is just something he just happened across it in a book of album covers that he had, where he wanted, he was looking through it for something to put in, and that's what happened. So, it's like, yeah, like down to little things like that. So, and like the very symmetrical design of the, the Rum Runner skull and crossbones design with the back-to-back R's.
Yeah.
That's reflected in the puddle. Yeah, stuff like that. It's just, yeah, it's everywhere. So yeah, it's put together on such an insane level. It's mad. But yeah, there we go. That is what Watchmen is. It's just insane attention to detail.
I want to mention my favourite chapter.
I wasn't going to gloss over you. I was going to let you mention your most favourite. No, I was just finishing a point. Insane levels of detail. Apologies. Carry on.
Closure.
I was not closing. Go on.
Chapter 12.
Yeah.
Every day of the week for me. I think those first 3 or 4 pages, they kind of take your breath away, even though you know it's coming. The artwork is undeniably fantastic, but it's like, oh shit, it actually happened.
Yeah.
It's almost like, at least when I reread it this time, I tried to forget, which is a hard thing to do. You try to put out of your mind what you already remember and try and go in as empty and as blank as you can. And it still caught me off guard, those couple of pages, like the full pages, the blood and the devastation. And I think it really...
Tentacles.
Well, yeah, I guess so. And it's just such
alien blood.
A strong image with the blood pouring down the clock with the doomsday. It's finally struck 12, which is, I guess, simple because it's quite obvious and on the nose, but it's such a breathtaking couple of pages. And
it's just, little things like the smiley face motif appearing all the way through the book, and just all the attention to detail in there, and just like the absolute madness of the plot itself, like all these creatives that have been spirited away to this island in secret to create this giant squid thing that is a feat of genetic engineering that is then going to teleport for the sole purpose of exploding it and killing people. Like, the thing lasts a split second. It's like,
and weirdly, even though I know kind of who dies and all that stuff, there's something away the story and the pacing in that last chapter with the characters. I have a certain fear for them, and I think it's because Ozymandias is so enigmatic throughout the entire book.
Yeah,
the entire book, and then you finally, I guess it's a chapter in some ways dedicated to him because you learn about his past, and it's just fantastic. And there's something that the comic led me down the garden path in many ways because I forgot. I don't know how. I forgot who Laurie's father was, and there's a point where she thinks it's hooded justice, and I was like, oh yeah, maybe I couldn't remember. And then you get the scene where the comedian sees her after one of the parties, and he's like, can I not even talk to my, and he gets interrupted.
My old friend's daughter.
I thought that was like a red herring.
Yeah.
And then I was like, is it? And then by the end, obviously, it's in that last scene with Sally.
Yeah.
Kissing the photograph of the comedian and stuff. And honestly, I was taken along for the ride. And for a book that I know, I don't want to say inside and out. I think there's a lot of details that you can overlook on a read, and then you go back and read again, and you pick up on stuff differently. Yeah,
it's like every time. Well, I'm saying like between when I first read this and what I remembered about it to when I started reading it again in preparation for this, like it felt like a completely different book.
I think I still think that's with age.
Yeah, but it's also, I think every time you look at it, you notice something else as well.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
It's one of those books where it's just so much detail crammed in. There's just so much crammed into each page in each chapter that every time you look at it, you discover something else.
And whereas I think another strong, not to mention another favorite chapter, but chapter 11 where you first see the snow, that's really like, wow, white, like really bright white, and it's a really change of visual style. And I was like, wow, this looks great.
I do
get that beautiful moment where Rorschach apologizes to Night Owl.
Yeah.
And shakes hand. And that, honestly, I was like, oh. And once again, I'm empathizing with the psychopath, but I think it's a nice moment because he is his only friend at the end of the day.
Yeah,
and that's after Night Owl kind of has a bit of an outburst on him, like saying like, "No wonder
so hard to be friends with you."
Yeah, and like he's right. He's totally right. And then you have that. I think that's my most sympathetic moment for him.
It's almost like Night Owl's his enabler in a way as well. Like. You know,
well, I think he kept him on a bit of a leash because while he worked with Night Owl, they were far more clean cut, and then he started obviously killing his.
Well, it was the one case that sent him over the edge, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When Rorschach was born, when it was no longer Walter pretending to be Rorschach.
Yeah,
Walter Kovac. But yeah,
I tell you, Night Owl looks hilarious in that last chapter as well, where he's like. Got dyed hair and a tash.
Oh god, yeah, where he's blonde.
Yeah, I understand that idea of like hiding your identity stuff.
Yeah.
I really like that last moment where she goes and visits her mother, and there's something Laurie says. Well, in fact, it is. She says, "I know who my father is," and it's almost like Laurie's gone to forgive her mother, and I feel like Sally's been holding this inside for so long. That Laurie knows this, and it kind of acts as a way for her to let go and kind of, unfortunately, let it be in the past. Like obviously the tragic moments as well, but I think it's just a nice moment for those two characters who probably feel, at least to me, they've never had a proper mother-daughter relationship.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know what a proper relationship of any sort is, but she's always been like that, forced into doing the superhero thing, yada yada yada.
Yeah, agreed. So, does anybody have anything further to add to this mammoth 2-hour podcast before we close up?
Honestly, I'm going to have to say no, because I could keep going. And as Leon said in the group chat earlier, there's almost like nothing that hasn't been said about this book, unfortunately. God, why can't this have like came out last week?
I know.
We have like the freedom there. And I think when I was leading up to this, I thought, I'm going to enjoy revisiting again. But it's actually better, even better than I remember. I think I really appreciate it as a fine work of art. And it's been a pleasure to talk about it. I was really anxious, but excited to like talk about this with you lot. And I think there's no comic book that's as good as this for me personally. I don't read as much as you guys. I get that, but I'm a graphic novel dude.
No, for me, this is like a. I think I can appreciate it more reading it again now than I could, because obviously I know more. I've grown more. I'm, a different person than what I was when I was younger, and I can appreciate it more now than I could back then, definitely, for sure. And I feel that for what it is and for what it represents in the history of comics, there's not a lot that does compare to it. And I agree with you. It is like the top of the mountain, if you will. Like, there's not a lot. I mean, I read a lot of comics, and I read a lot of things that I... Do I really? Yeah. No, I read a lot of comics, and I read a lot of things that I would say, you know, I can hold up on this podcast, and I can say, read this because it's brilliant, and, you know, this is won an Eisner, you need to get on this or whatever, and I can shout about things, I can rave about things, I can say, this needs critical acclaim, this is great. But what I can't do is say that anything is as important to comics as this book, maybe. When I think about it, I mean, someone's going to correct me. They always, I can feel it.
I mean, it's very personal.
Yeah,
because I feel like this. I don't want to say it defined me, but it's it very much makes, like, I know what kind of stories I like, and whether it's because of this or what. But this is certainly the kind of stuff that I like. I'm really excited to talk about the film.
Yeah,
next
me too.
Time, and the other, and of course the TV show. I think.
Yeah.
There's a fantastic interview I'd recommend people watch on YouTube, which is somebody asks Alan Moore what he thinks about film and how it translates from the comics to the films, and it's such a great piece that he says about it. And, like, he's a bit of a dick. Like, I mean, he's very strong opinions, like opinionated, which but I feel like he can be. I feel like if there's anybody who can say comics don't translate well to film, it's going to be him. Yeah, easy. I mean, like, I in some ways I agree with him, because, I mean, as we've discussed at length on this cast before, there are a lot of things you can do with comics that you can't do with film. In film, time's very linear, and going back to the Doc Manhattan thing, that's just how it is, you know. It's like, with film's very linear, and then you can still, like, you can go all over the place with comics. Comics it can do very interesting things with time that film can't, and can show you moments in from several different angles in several different ways that and things you just cannot get with a film, especially with action scenes and things like that. Though at the same time as well, the fact that I wouldn't respect what he says as much if he'd let his comics get made into films and got the money for it. Yeah. But he strips his name from any of the films. He gets no money from any of it. Yeah. So, like, he's serious about it. He's not just lazy, you know. And with that, I think we have to come to a close. That has been Ace Comicals episode number 83. We have begun our journey to discussing Watchmen. And what we'll do is we'll come back to you with the next episode on this, which will be sometime in the future, where we will discuss the movies and the film media. So, Askew, where can we find you? You can find my podcast. Well, not mine, but I'm part of a podcast called Dynamite in the Brain, which is dynamiteinthebrain.com. Twitter is Ant Askew, and I also play games on Twitch, which is also Ant Askew. I don't think I'll ever play the Watchmen game on stream, though. But I have played a demo of that game. It's just is where it is. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter under @Batto. That's BATTOU. Mostly talking about comics. Join the conversation. At me, DM me, whatever. Give me some recommendations to read, and tell them what's a more important comic to the industry than Watchmen. Yeah, exactly. Disagree with everything I've just said on this podcast. Yeah, so, I'm not trying to, like, put that out as a challenge. I'm just saying. Yeah. I like to hear what people think is it's important to them. It is. Good. Yeah. I want to know I want to know what you guys if you guys have opinions on that. I want to know them. So yeah, come at me. But yeah, so you can find me on Twitter under @Batto. You can find Ace Comicals on Twitter @AceComicals. Leon, where can we find you? You can find me on Twitter @LeonEverett. You can find everything Ace Comicals at www.acecomicals.com. I mean, like, we're pretty much everywhere you can find a podcast: Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, Castro, iTunes. Have I missed any? Probably, but we're there. You've got a Ko-fi? Yeah, we've got a Ko-fi, yeah. So if you are so inclined, you can donate the price of a coffee to help keep the lights on here at Ace Comicals. All the money that
goes to defray the cost of keeping the website hosted and everything else.
I thought it went to your comics.
No.
Which wouldn't be the worst thing, so you know.
No. Yeah, no, we use it all to pay for, if we do get any donations, we use it to go against the cost of keeping the website hosted and everything else. So,
thanks very much for having me on, Greg.
Yeah, no problem. It's been a pleasure to have you, actually. It's been great to have you here.
This is possibly my favourite thing to talk about.
Yeah.
Whether the listeners agree or Leon agrees. Cool. We didn't even mention Bubastis, but I'm not going to now.
No, we'll do that next time. We've got another 2 episodes of Watchmen to go. I know
when it's great.
This is just part 1. This is just like, the appetizer, the starter. It's a 2-hour starter, but yeah, they're 2.5 hours nearly. Jeez, but there we go. Yeah, so that has been Ace Comicals episode number 83. So that is Ace Comicals over and out.